Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is an 1847 novel by Emily Brontë, initially published under the pseudonym Ellis Bell. It concerns two families of the landed gentry living on the West Yorkshire moors, the Earnshaws and the Lintons, and their turbulent relationships with Earnshaw's adopted son, Heathcliff. The novel was influenced by Romanticism and Gothic fiction. Wuthering Heights is now considered a classic of English literature, but contemporaneous reviews were polarised. It was controversial for its depictions of mental and physical cruelty, and for its challenges to Victorian morality and religious and societal values. Wuthering Heights was accepted by publisher Thomas Newby along with Anne Brontë's Agnes before the success of their sister Charlotte's novel Jane Eyre, but they were published later. Charlotte edited a second edition of Wuthering Heights after Emily's death, which was published in 1850. It has inspired an array of adaptations across several media, including a hit song. In 1801, Mr. Lockwood, the new tenant at Thrushcross Grange in Yorkshire, pays a visit to his landlord, Heathcliff, at his remote moorland farmhouse, Wuthering Heights. There he meets a reserved young woman, Joseph, a cantankerous servant, and Hareton, an uneducated young man who speaks like a servant. Everyone is sullen and inhospitable. Snowed in for the night, he reads some diary entries of a former inhabitant of his room, Catherine Earnshaw, and has a nightmare in which a ghostly Catherine begs to enter through the window. Woken by Lockwood's fearful yells, Heathcliff is troubled. Lockwood returns to Thrushcross Grange in heavy snow, falls ill from the cold and becomes bedridden. While he recovers, Lockwood's housekeeper Ellen Dean tells him the story of the strange family. "30 years earlier, the Earnshaws live at Wuthering Heights with their children, Hindley and Catherine, and a servant, Nellie herself. Returning from a trip to Liverpool, Earnshaw brings a young orphan whom he names Heathcliff. Earnshaw treats the boy as his favourite. His own children he neglects, especially after his wife dies. Hindley beats Heathcliff, who gradually becomes close friends with Catherine. Hindley departs for university, returning as the new master of Wuthering Heights on the death of his father 3 years later. He and his new wife Frances allow Heathcliff to stay, but only as a servant. Heathcliff and Catherine spy on Edgar Linton and his sister Isabella, children who live nearby at Thrushcross Grange. Catherine is attacked by their dog, and the Lintons take her in, sending Heathcliff home. When the Lintons visit, Hindley and Edgar make fun of Heathcliff. A fight ensues. Heathcliff is locked in the attic and vows revenge. Frances dies after giving birth to a son, Hareton. 2 years later, Catherine becomes engaged to Edgar. She confesses to Nellie that she loves Heathcliff, and will try to help but cannot marry him because of his low social status. Nellie warns her against the plan. Heathcliff overhears part of the conversation and, misunderstanding Catherine's heart, flees the household. Catherine falls ill, distraught. Edgar and Catherine marry, and 3 years later Heathcliff unexpectedly returns, now a wealthy gentleman. He encourages Isabella's infatuation with him as a means of revenge on Catherine. Enraged by Heathcliff's constant presence at Thrushcross Grange, Edgar cuts off contact. Catherine responds by locking herself in her room and refusing food. Pregnant with Edgar's child, she never fully recovers. At Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff gambles with Hindley, who mortgages the property to him to pay his debts. Heathcliff elopes with Isabella, but the relationship fails and they soon return. When Heathcliff discovers that Catherine is dying, he visits her in secret. She dies shortly after giving birth to a daughter, Cathy, and Heathcliff rages, calling on her ghost to haunt him for as long as he lives. Isabella flees south, where she gives birth to Heathcliff's son, Linton. Hindley dies 6 months later, leaving Heathcliff as master of Wuthering Heights. 12 years later, Isabella is dying and the still sickly Linton is brought back to life with his uncle Edgar at the Grange, but Heathcliff insists that his son must instead live with him. Cathy and Linton gradually develop a relationship. Heathcliff schemes to ensure that they marry, and on Edgar's death demands that the couple move in with him. He becomes increasingly wild and reveals that on the night Catherine died he dug up her grave, and ever since has been plagued by her ghost. When Linton dies, Cathy has no option but to remain at Wuthering Heights. Lockwood grows tired of the moors and moves away. 8 months later he sees Nellie again and she reports that Cathy has been teaching the still uneducated Hareton to read. Heathcliff was seeing visions of the dead Catherine. He avoided the young people, saying that he could not bear to see Catherine's eyes, which they both shared, looking at him. He had stopped eating, and some days later was found dead in Catherine's old room. In the present, Lockwood learns that Cathy and Hareton plan to marry and move to the Grange. Joseph is left to take care of the declining Wuthering Heights. Nellie says that the locals have seen the ghosts of Catherine and Heathcliff wandering abroad together, and hopes they are at peace. Heathcliff is a foundling from Liverpool, who is taken by Mr. Earnshaw to Wuthering Heights, where he is reluctantly cared for by the family, and spoiled by his adopted father. He and Catherine Earnshaw grow close, and their love is the central theme of the first volume. His revenge against the man she chooses to marry and its consequences are the central theme of the second volume. Heathcliff has been considered a Byronic hero, but critics have pointed out that he reinvents himself at various points, making his character hard to fit into any single type. He has an ambiguous position in society, and his lack of status is underlined by the fact that Heathcliff is both his given name and his surname. The character of Heathcliff may have been inspired by Emily Brontë. An alcoholic and an opium addict, he would have indeed terrorized Emily and her sister Charlotte during frequent crises of delirium tremens that affected him a few years before his death. Even though Heathcliff has no alcohol or drug problems, the influence of Branwell's character is likely. Hindley Earnshaw, an alcoholic, often seized with madness, also owes something to Branwell. Catherine Earnshaw, first introduced to the reader after her death, through Lockwood's discovery of her diary and carvings. The description of her life is confined almost entirely to the first volume. She seems unsure whether she is, or wants to become, more like Heathcliff, or aspires to be more like Edgar. Some critics have argued that her decision to marry Edgar Linton is allegorically a rejection of nature and a surrender to culture, a choice with unfortunate fateful consequences for all the other characters. She dies hours after giving birth to her daughter. Edgar Linton, introduced as a child in the Linton family, he resides at Thrushcross Grange. Edgar's style and manners are in sharp contrast to those of Heathcliff, who instantly dislikes him, and of Catherine, who is drawn to him. Catherine marries him instead of Heathcliff because of his higher social status, with disastrous results to all characters in the story. He dotes on his wife and later his daughter. Ellen Dean, the main narrator of the novel, Nellie is a servant to 3 generations of the Earnshaws and 2 of the Linton family. Humbly born, she regards herself nevertheless as Hindley's foster sister. She lives and works among the rough inhabitants of Wuthering Heights but is well read, and she also experiences the more genteel manners of Thrushcross Grange. She is referred to as Ellen, her given name, to show respect, and as Nellie among those close to her. Critics have discussed how far her actions as an apparent bystander affect the other characters and how much her narrative can be relied on. Isabella Linton, Edgar's sister. She views Heathcliff romantically, despite Catherine's warnings, and becomes an unwitting participant in his plot for revenge against Edgar. Heathcliff marries her but treats her abusively. While pregnant, she escapes to London and gives birth to a son, Linton. She entrusts her son to her brother Edgar when she dies. Hindley Earnshaw, Catherine's elder brother, Hindley, despises Heathcliff immediately and bullies him throughout their childhood before his father sends him away to college. Hindley returns with his wife, Frances, after Mr. Earnshaw dies. He is more mature, but his hatred of Heathcliff remains the same. After Frances's death, Hindley reverts to destructive behavior, neglects his son, and ruins the Earnshaw family by drinking and gambling to excess. Heathcliff beats Hindley up at one point after Hindley fails in his attempt to kill Heathcliff with a pistol. He dies less than a year after Catherine and leaves his son with nothing. Hareton Earnshaw, the son of Hindley and Frances, raised at first by Nellie but soon by Heathcliff. Joseph works to instill a sense of pride in the Earnshaw heritage. Heathcliff, in contrast, teaches him vulgarities as a way of avenging himself on Hindley. Hareton speaks with an accent similar to Joseph's, and occupies a position similar to that of a servant at Wuthering Heights, unaware that he has been done out of his inheritance. He can only read his name. In appearance, he reminds Heathcliff of his aunt, Catherine. Cathy Linton, the daughter of Catherine and Edgar Linton, a spirited and strong-willed girl unaware of her parents' history. Edgar is very protective of her and as a result, she is eager to discover what lies beyond the confines of the Grange. Although one of the more sympathetic characters of the novel, she is also somewhat snobbish towards Hareton and his lack of education. She falls in love with and marries Linton Heathcliff. The American Whig Review wrote, Respecting a book so original as this, and written with so much power of imagination, it is natural that there should be many opinions. Indeed, its power is so predominant that it is not easy after a hasty reading to analyze one's impressions so as to speak of its merits and demerits with confidence. We have been taken and carried through a new region, a melancholy waste, with here and there patches of beauty, have been brought in contact with fierce passions, with extremes of love and hate, and with sorrow that none but those who have suffered can understand. This has not been accomplished with ease, but with an ill-mannered contempt for the decencies of language, and in a style which might resemble that of a Yorkshire farmer who should have endeavoured to eradicate his provincialism by taking lessons of a London footman. We have had many sad bruises and tumbles in our journey, yet it was interesting, and at length we are safely arrived at a happy conclusion. Douglas Jerrold's weekly newspaper wrote, "Wuthering Heights is a strange sort of book, baffling all regular criticism, yet, it is impossible to begin and not finish it. And quite as impossible to lay it aside afterwards and say nothing about. In Wuthering Heights the reader is shocked, disgusted, almost sickened by details of cruelty, inhumanity, and the most diabolical hate and vengeance, and anon come passages of powerful testimony to the supreme power of love, even over demons in the human form. The women in the book are of a strange fiendish angelic nature, tantalizing, and terrible, and the men are indescribable out of the book itself. We strongly recommend all our readers who love novelty to get this story, for we can promise them that they never have read anything like it before. It is very puzzling and very interesting." High Sunderland Hall, near Law Hill, Halifax, where Emily worked briefly as a governess in 1838, now demolished, has also been suggested as a model for Wuthering Heights. However, it is too grand for a farmhouse. Pondon Hall is famous for reputedly being the inspiration for Thrushcross Grange, since Brontë was a frequent visitor. However, it does not match the description given in the novel and is closer in size and appearance to the farmhouse of Wuthering Heights. The Brontë biographer Winifred Guerin believed that Pondon Hall was the original of Wildfell Hall, the old mansion in Anne Bronte's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Helen Smart, while noting that Thrushcross Grange has traditionally been associated with Pondon Hall, Stanbury, near Haworth, sees Shibden Hall, North Oram, in Halifax Parish, as more likely, referring to Hilda Marsden's article The Scenic Background of Wuthering Heights. Film and TV. The earliest known film adaptation of Wuthering Heights was filmed in England in 1920 and was directed by A.V. Bramble. It is unknown if any prints still exist. The most famous is 1939's Wuthering Heights, starring Laurence Olivier and Merle Oberon and directed by William Wyler. This acclaimed adaptation, like many others, eliminated the second generation's story and is rather inaccurate as a literary adaptation. It won the 1939 New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Film and was nominated for the 1939 Academy Award for Best Picture. In 1958, an adaptation aired on CBS television as part of the series DuPont Show of the Month, starring Rosemary Harris as Cathy and Richard Burton as Heathcliff. The BBC produced a 4-part television dramatisation in 1967 starring Ian McShane and Angela Schuyler. The 1970 film with Timothy Dalton as Heathcliff is the first colour version of the novel. It has gained acceptance over the years, although it was initially poorly received. The character of Hindley is portrayed much more sympathetically, and his story arc is altered. It also subtly suggests that Heathcliff may be Cathy's illegitimate half-brother. In 1978, the BBC produced a 5-part TV serialisation of the book starring Ken Hutchinson, Cad's Head, and John Dutteen, with music by Carl Davis. It is considered one of the most faithful adaptations of Emily Bronte's story. There is also a 1985 French film adaptation, Hurlevent by Jacques Rivette. The 1992 film Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights starring Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche is notable for including the oft-omitted second-generation story of the children of Cathy, Hindley and Heathcliff. More recent film or TV adaptations include ITV's 2009 2-part drama series starring Tom Hardy, Charlotte Riley, Sarah Lancashire, and Andrew Lincoln, and the 2011 film starring Cusco Delario and James Howson and directed by Andrea Arnold. Adaptations which place the story in a new setting include the 1954 adaptation, retitled Abismos de Pasión, directed by Spanish filmmaker Luis Buñuel and set in Catholic Mexico, with Heathcliff and Cathy renamed Alejandro and Catalina. In Buñuel's version, Heathcliff Alejandro claims to have become rich by making a deal with Satan. The New York Times reviewed a re-release of this film as an almost magical example of how an artist of genius can take someone else's classic work and shape it to fit his own temperament without really violating it. Noting that the film was thoroughly Spanish and Catholic in its tone while still highly faithful to Brontë. Yoshihide Yoshida's 1988 adaptation also has a transposed setting, this time to medieval Japan. In Yoshida's version, the Heathcliff character, Onimaru, is raised in a nearby community of priests who worship a local fire god. Filipino director Carlos Sigwayan Reyna made a film adaptation titled Hihintayin Kita sa Langit. The screenplay was written by Raquel Villavicencio and produced by Armida Sigwayan Reyna. It starred Richard Gomez as Gabriel and Dawn Zuluetu as Carmina. It became a Filipino film classic. In 2003, MTV produced a poorly reviewed version set in a modern California high school. The 1966 Indian film Dil Diya Dadliya is based upon this novel. The film is directed by Abdul Rashid Gada and Dilip Kumar. The film stars Dilip Kumar, Wahida Rahman, Pran Rahman, Shyama, and Johnny Walker. The music is by Norshad. Although it did not fare as well as other movies of Dilip Kumar, it was well received by critics. Music. Kate Bush's 1978 song Wuthering Heights is most likely the best-known creative work inspired by Bronte's story that is not properly an adaptation. Bush wrote and released the song when she was 18 and chose it as the lead single in her debut album. It was primarily inspired by the 1939 Olivier Oberon film, which deeply affected Bush in her teenage years. The song is sung from Catherine's point of view as she pleads at Heathcliff's window to be admitted. It uses quotations from Catherine, both in the chorus, "Let me in, I'm so cold," and the verses, with Catherine admitting she had bad dreams in the night. Critic Sheila Whiteley wrote that the ethereal quality of the vocal resonates with Cathy's dementia, and that Bush's high register has both childlike qualities in its purity of tone and an underlying eroticism in its sinuous erotic contours. Singer Pat Benatar covered the song in 1980 on her Crimes of Passion album. Brazilian heavy metal band Angra released a version of Bush's song on its debut album Angels Cry in 1993. A 2018 cover of Bush's Wuthering Heights by Oiringer adds electro-punk elements. Wind and Wuthering by English rock band Genesis alludes to the Brontë novel not only in the album's title but also in the titles of two of its tracks, Unquiet Slumbers for the Sleepers, and In That Quiet Earth. Both titles refer to the closing lines in the novel. Songwriter Jim Steinman said that he wrote the 1989 song It's All Coming Back to Me Now while under the influence of Wuthering Heights. He said that the song was about being enslaved and obsessed by love and compared it to Heathcliff digging up Cathy's corpse and dancing with it in the cold moonlight. The 2008 song Cath, by indie rock band Death Cab for Cutie, was inspired by Wuthering Heights. The 1991 song cover My Eyes by the band Marillion includes the line "Like the girl in the novel in the wind on the moors."